So in 2017, Canada will have much to celebrate. We will marvel at our natural beauty. We will cherish our peace and prosperity. We will take comfort and pride in our laws and institutions. We will define ourselves by our generosity and our civility, and we will be astonished by our breathtaking diversity. But in 2017, Canada must do more. Nations do not remain great simply by rehearsing and celebrating their past achievements. In 2017, Canadians must cast our collective gaze not only at our past glories, but also at our future challenges. Let us never forget that in 1867, the framers of this Constitution were focused on the present with an eye on the future, and we must do the same. So what are these challenges? Well, I think that we know two of them, and I won't discuss them in any length. Climate change and the rise of China and India will profoundly shape the lives of Canadians for the next generation and beyond in ways that I think that few of us fully comprehend. But to this list, I want to add a third today, and that is enormous demographic change. So let me review some facts. So first, Canada's population grew enormously over the 20th century, but this growth is increasingly and disproportionately concentrated in certain provinces. So between 1981 and 2006, the country's population grew from 24 to 31 million, but 82% of this growth occurred in Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. And population growth will continue to be concentrated in those three provinces. Secondly, Canada has become an urban nation. In 1901, 37% of Canadians lived in urban regions. By 2006, that figure had risen to 80%. Within urban Canada, 68% of Canadians live in our largest urban centres. And even more dramatically, 10 million people now live in metropolitan Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. The rise of urban Canada has been fueled by international and internal migration. Nearly 3/4 of the immigrants who arrived in Canada between 1991 and 2001 settled in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. But it is often overlooked that the migration of persons born within Canada away from rural to urban areas has been an equally dramatic trend in the last 20 years. Third, Canada's population is aging. In 1946, Canada's median age was 28. By 2006, it had risen to 39, and it is projected to continue to rise to between 45 and 50 by 2056. As a consequence, Canada's dependency ratio, that is the number of persons not working age for every 100 persons of working age, will increase rapidly. In 2005, this was 44. In 2031, it is projected to be as high as 61. Finally, the aging of Canada's population is geographically uneven. The youngest parts of Canada will increasingly overlap with those parts of Canada where population is increasingly concentrated. So these facts, these demographic trends, are now firmly set. In the short term, there may be some variation, but in the long-term trajectory is clear and unavoidable. In 2017, these trends will be even more evident. So we are witnessing history unfolding before our very eyes. Demography is destiny, and we ignore it at our peril. In the world of public policy, these demographic trends have been at the root of our debates about budget deficits and productivity and healthcare costs, which will only become more active in the next years to come. But what I want to say today is that these debates are too narrow because they ignore the regionally uneven pattern of demographic change. And so if we link demography and geography, the questions we will have to address in the next 50 years are not just about fiscal and economic policy, but they are constitutional. So one of the major, and I would say perhaps even the major question for constitutional politics in the 21st century is how our institutions will respond to these profound demographic change. At the most fundamental level, the question will be this: will votes, political power, and public expenditure follow people as they make choices about where to work and live and raise their families, and in the process, fundamentally alter the geographic distribution of Canada's population? In 2017, it is this question which we must begin to discuss. Do I have the answers? Of course I don't, but it is a question that I think is already forcing its way onto the political agenda. Let me quickly mention two examples. And these both arise from the area of political representation. So as you know, there are complex rules that govern the allocation of seats in the House of Commons, both across provinces and within provinces. And these rules are increasingly producing enormous disparities in the sizes of ridings. Ridings in BC, Alberta, Ontario are significantly larger and have more people in ridings than in other provinces. Within every province, urban ridings are far more populous than rural ridings. These variations are deliberate. They are designed to protect the minority of voters who live in smaller provinces and rural areas. However, they are producing a House of Commons that is increasingly at odds with the principle of one person, one vote. As population growth continues to be concentrated in precisely those provinces where the ridings are the largest, this gap will grow considerably. And the failure to grow the House of Commons has had the unfortunate consequence of contributing to unstable parliaments. Another area of controversy is Senate reform. It's been long proposed that we clothe the upper house with some degree of democratic legitimacy, either through elections or more recently through consultations. But democratic legitimacy isn't the only issue. The other issue is regional representation. BC and Alberta, very fastly growing provinces, have long argued that the distribution of Senate seats in the current Senate reflects a time when the Western provinces were much smaller than they are today. But Ontario, which historically has been absent from these debates, has made a new and dramatically different point. So what Ontario says now is this: when the Senate was designed, no one contemplated that a single province would have 40% of Canada's population, a proportion that is projected to increase well into the next century. Now, in every federation, an upper chamber is structured on the basis of a principle of representation that is different from one person, one vote. But we must turn our minds soon to crafting an upper chamber that reflects Canada's great population asymmetry, especially if we democratize the process for selecting senators. Finally, let me consider cities. Cities are creatures of provincial legislation and traditionally have been viewed as minor players in public policy. But for major metropolitan centers, that perception is changing. Global city regions have a central role in economic prosperity in the information age. So should we begin to think of major urban areas as a third order of government? If so, should their juridical status and their regulatory and revenue-raising powers change to reflect their importance? So these are very difficult issues. They go to the heart of how we design Canadian democracy in the next century. And how we make choices about those questions will shape economic policy and social policy. Let me conclude with a story about Confederation to say why I think we can have the debate that we need to have in the years to come. So there are many reasons why Confederation happened. We tend to emphasize how Confederation was about the coming together of the separate colonies of British North America. But it also involved the division of one of those colonies, the United Province of Canada. As you know, that province was created in 1840 through the union of Lower and Upper Canada. Each half of Canada was represented by equal numbers of representatives in the Legislative Assembly. Originally, Canada East population was larger than that of Canada West, and therefore it opposed the system of representation in the name of rep by pomp. A decade later, the positions had reversed, and it was Canada West that had a greater population and demanded rep by pomp. Disagreement on this basic issue ultimately led to the deadlock in 1864, and a new constitutional dispensation was needed to break this deadlock. And so at the very heart of 1867 was a constitutional bargain that combined rep by pop in the House of Commons and a federal constitutional structure. So what are the lessons of this moment of our founding as a federation in 1867 to our sesquicentennial in 2017? And so I think that there are two lessons. The first lesson is that we must remind ourselves of this basic constitutional commitment which let Canada come into being. But far more importantly, we must remember that above all, 1867 was a moment of clear-sightedness and imagination, driven by demographic change that led us to adapt our institutions to deal better with new demographic realities. In 2017, the best way to celebrate this achievement would be to follow the example of the Fathers of Confederation and to be clear-sighted and imaginative yet again. Thank you.